Knowing what gems to put in your filler druid can be tricky, especially if you're around the crit cap. I see a lot of questions on the druid Discord about gemming and what gems to put in their gear, so I want to provide you guys with a strategy that you can follow to always reach the optimal gem setup. Now, the people asking about this on the druid Discord always get the same answer. Use this suggest gems feature in the WoW sims. And that's great. I mean, why shouldn't you? This suggest gems gives great gems, and you don't have to worry about it. Well, the biggest reason for following this strategy instead is to get a deeper understanding of what happens behind the scenes. This game is a lot more fun if you know all the min-max and you know everything about your character and the gear that it uses. So, we will also do a little comparison with the gems that we put in with the suggest gems feature and draw some conclusions of which way you might want to go. I will give you two examples. This first example is with my current gear setup. This setup don't have to consider the crit cap, and then I will give you an example with the phase 3 BIS setup that will have to care about the crit cap. Now the strategy looks exactly the same in both examples, but I just want to give you two examples so that we can discuss everything we need to discuss when putting gems in your gear. So, what is my strategy then? Well, it's a 4-step way of putting your gems in. The first step is to put in your meta and your nightmare tier. The second step is to reach your armor pen cap, now that being hard or soft cap, it's up to you, but that's the second step. The third step is reaching the hit or expertise cap. Now reaching the hit and expertise cap intertwine a little bit with each other, so I put those two in the same step. And then the fourth and last step is to fill out the rest of your gems with as much value as you can. Before we start off, I just want to talk a little bit about socket bonuses. And to really understand them, we first have to look at the stat weights here. Now these stats is weights when the stat is nowhere near a cap. So let's take expertise here, for example, it's worth 2.44, but if I was near or over the cap, then the value for expertise would be a lot less than this, if not 0. So these are all considered weights when we can get the full potential out of these particular stats. But as you can see here, these stats are kind of close to each other. The strength and agility is almost the same, hit and crit isn't too far away from each other, same as expertise and haste. So with this in mind, we can look at some of our gear. So let's take these boots for example. These have a yellow and a red socket. Now whichever socket I might put in this red and yellow one, the value between those two sockets will be very small. So in order for me not to put in the appropriate gems to reach the bonus, then the difference between the gems would have to outweigh the bonus, which they never do if the bonus is offensive. So we always want to gem for the bonuses with gear that only has red or yellow sockets. Now if an item have a blue socket, we will almost never gem for the socket bonus, because the blue gem only has one offensive value and the bonus must outweigh the potential other offensive stat from a gem, and that is seldom the case, except for the item that you put your nightmare tier in, but we will get to that later. Okay, so that's why we're going for the bonuses often in our gear. In order to follow along these 4 steps and always put the ultimate gem in with each of the steps, I have prepared a little flowchart you can follow to always reach the optimal gem. Now this flowchart looks a little something like this. Now at first glance this might look weird or complicated, but we'll go over it together and you'll see that it's not as bad as it looks. So let's start from the top here. The first thing you want to do is put your meta gem in, and then your nightmare tier. And you should always place this nightmare tier in the item with a blue socket that has the best socket bonus out of all the items that contains a blue socket. After that's done, you can consider all other items with blue sockets items with only red sockets, because as we discussed briefly earlier, you won't go for the socket bonuses in those items anyway. Okay, when that's done, you want to get armor pen capped. Now, that's either hit hard or soft capped, depending on what you're shooting for, and if you are already armor pen capped when you get here, which is kind of unlikely, then you just skip this part. But otherwise, you should start putting armor pen in your red sockets. Now, I'm a jewel crafter, so I will use our jewel crafting gems in this video, but this flowchart don't consider the jewel crafting gems. And we'll also come to a little discussion of what jewel crafting gems to put in when, so we'll cover that as well. Now, the first crossroads you get to is if you're hit capped or not. Let's say you're not, you go in this way. And then the next crossroads is if you're expertise capped or not. And let's say you're not. Then you come down to this gem. Then you should start putting in 10 expertise, 10 hit, and starting off with the yellow gems, and then in the red ones. Now, if you reach an edge gem is considered a gem that brings you over the cap, or a gem that you remove that brings you under the cap. So, let's say you start putting these ones in, and suddenly you're over the hit cap. In that scenario, you want to know what gem you would put here instead if you wouldn't put this gem in, and then sim your stat weights and see what gem was the most optimal gem to put in. Now, in the unlikely scenario that you have filled out all your remaining gems with 10 expertise, 10 hit, and you're still not hit nor expertise capped, then you can go down here. Now, in this case, the most likely scenario is that either expertise or hit is a little bit more valuable to you, because as we get closer to the caps, the value for these stats gets smaller. So you want to sim your stats, and then maybe you find out that expertise is more valuable to you, then you should start replacing some of these gems with 20 expertise, and so on until they sim of equal value, or you reach one of the caps. And then you gemmed the ultimate way in your scenario. Now, getting here is kind of unlikely, but if you do, you do. Now, if I would, during any of these gemmings, get to a certain cap, let's say I put 2 of these ones in and suddenly I'm expertise capped, then I should stop what I'm doing and just go back to the first crossroads I get to here, which is if I'm expertise capped or not. Now I am expertise capped, so I will just go this way. So if I get here, you can see that I am not hit capped, but I am expertise capped. In this scenario, you want to start putting in either one of those 2 gems. 10 strength, 10 hit, or 10 agility, 10 hit, depending on if you're crit capped or not. And starting off with the yellow sockets. Now, if you put 10 agility, 10 hit in, and you're not crit capped, and you put in these ones in all of your sockets, and you're still not hit capped, then you can start replacing either one of these ones you just put in with 20 hit. And that's only valuable in the yellow sockets. And if you reach an edge gem, you should sim again if that was worth it or not. If you get to the very unlikely scenario that you replace all of these gems you might have with 20 hit into the yellow gems and you're still not hit capped, you can do a little trick. You can see if you have any of these 10 expertise, 10 hit laying around from the previous step. If you got any of those gems laying around in yellow sockets, you can switch places with that gem, and one of these ones you might have laying around, if this one is in a yellow and this one is in a red, then you can switch places with them, and that will give you another opportunity to do this step again without losing any expertise. I hope that makes sense. If not, hit me up in the comments or something and I will explain it to you. Anyway, getting down all the way here is very unlikely. Now, if we go up a little and we come to this crossroads and now we are hit capped, you go this way. Or if you're down here and you suddenly get hit capped, you come back here and go the hit capped way. So if you're hit capped, the first crossroads you get to is if you're expertise capped or not. Now if you're not, you can only put these 20 expertise ones in red sockets, because 10 expertise 10 hit wouldn't make any sense now since we're hit capped, so you only have this gem to choose from. And if you put these ones in, you get over the cap, which is an edge gem. You should sim if it was worth it or not. Now let's say you're expertise capped as well. That means you're both hit and expertise capped. So now we get to the last step, really, the fourth step, which is putting in as much value as you can. Now, if you get to this crossroads here, you want to know if you have any leftover yellow sockets laying around in your gear. Now, if you do, you can start putting in 10 edge, 10 crit in all of those. And it doesn't really matter if you get over the crit cap or not. Just put them in to start with, and we will adjust for it later. Now, of course, if you're familiar with this way of doing things and you start getting the understanding for this, then you can do shortcuts here in this process, because you might realize that this will bring me over the crit cap, so I might start off with this last step or something, but I will go the long way in this demonstration just to show you guys how I do things and how I think. So you put 10 agility, 10 crit in all remaining yellow sockets, and then you see if you're over the crit cap or not. Now if you're over the crit cap, then you can start replacing the 10 edge 10 crit with 10 strength 10 crit, because strength contains no crit while agility do, so lowering your agility gives more room for the crit rating to be worth its full potential. So this is the natural way of doing it if you're over the crit cap. Now if you change all of the 10 edge 10 crit for 10 strength 10 crit and you're still over the crit cap, then you should start replacing your 10 strength 10 crit with 10 strength 10 haste, because at this point crit and haste, now if you're very close to the crit cap, then crit and haste will be worth almost the same value as each other. So switching crit for haste is a good idea, since crit isn't worth its full potential over the crit cap, so haste will be a better option. So you start replacing crit with haste here. And now you want to do this until you're under the cap, or if all of your sockets runs out and you're still over the cap, then you can't do anything about it. So that's the optimal way of handling your yellow gems. Now if you have handled all your remaining yellow gems, then that means that you have no empty yellow sockets left, and the only thing left in your gear must be red or blue gems. And the blue gems is also considered red, so you only have red gems remaining. Now, the only thing you have to consider now is if you crit capped or not. If you're not, then you put 20 agility in. Now, if this agility gem puts you over the cap just the slightest, so you put an agility gem in, you get over the cap, then replace it with a 20 strength, because agility and strength are worth the same value, so you losing out just a little bit on the crit part of the agility, then strength will take the upper hand. The final thing you want to know before you start putting your gems in is your caps. Now if you want to know what your caps are, then you can check the Druid Discord, go to the Feral DPS channel and check the pins there, and you'll find your caps. Now most of these caps are common knowledge, but I will just go over them anyway. The hit cap is 8%, the expertise cap is 6.5%, the armor pen soft cap is 649 rating if you got Mjolnir Runestone, which I do, so I will go with that cap. Now if you look at my gear, I got both Idol of Mutilation and Dark Matter. And for the crit soft cap, we can see the last line says a certain percent there with Idol and Dark Matter, but I will ignore that line, because Dark Matter isn't a trinket you should gem around, because the uptime of it is very small and the proc of it gives a lot of crit, so for the very big majority of the fight you will have a lot of crit to compensate for if you want to gem around it, and that's never worth it. So I will ignore that line and go with the line of just the Idol. So I will consider my crit soft cap at 77.95%. Now, we mentioned both hard caps and soft caps here, and the difference between those two is a hard cap is a threshold and if you go over that threshold, the value turns to 0. So let's say you got 7% hit, and you gem up to 9% hit. Then half of your gems you just put in is worth 0 value, and are essentially wasted. The same thing with expertise. Now armor pen, they mention a soft cap, so that means that the 649 rating is just a limit, and if you go over that limit, the value of the stat gets lower. And if you're under the limit, then the value of the stat is a lot more worth. So let's say you got 639 rating and you came up to 659 rating, then half of the value you just put in is counted as a reduced value. And the same thing goes with the crit. And the 649 value with armor pen comes from Mjolnir runestone, because there is a hard cap for armor pen as well at 1400 rating, and you can subtract from that the proc chance from Mjolnir runestone, which is 751, and you will end up with 649. So when Mjolnir procs and you got 649, then you're at your hard cap, and putting in any more armor pen will be wasted. But for the majority of the fight, Mjolnir isn't up, so going over the cap is still worth something, so the armor pen you put in after 649 is still not worthless. And the same thing goes really with the crit. It's just a little more complicated than that, because that's filling out certain tables of what happens when you land a strike, and I won't go over that in this video. Just know that if you go over the crit cap, then the value of crit gets reduced. Okay, with that in mind, we can start follower chart and put gem in my current gear. So the first thing I want to do is put the metal gem in, so I'm putting it in here. The second thing is putting in the nightmare tear, and I know beforehand that my legs are the item with the most valuable socket bonus with the blue socket, so I put my nightmare tear in the blue socket of that item. Now, the third step, or third part of the flowchart, is to get armor pen capped. Now, I'm under my armor pen cap of 649, so I start putting armor pen in. I'm a jewel crafter, so I will utilize my armor pen jewel crafting gems, and then adjust later if it turns out that putting 3 of the fractured ones in wasn't worth it. So I will just start off by putting in the heavy armor pen in red sockets. Now I'm still under the cap, so I will just continue putting in fractured cardinal rubies until I reach my cap. Now I'm at 647. It's 2 under. Now I can't get any closer than this by replacing one of these gems and putting in more 20 armor pen, so I will be satisfied here, and putting in any more armor pen than this will bring me over my soft cap, which will reduce the value of armor pen, so I won't do that. So now if you look at the flowchart we just went over and start from the top, you can see that I just put my meta gem in, I put my nightmare tear in, I reach my armor pen soft cap, so the first little crossroads I get to here is if I'm hit capped or not. So let's see then. I'm 1.5% under the hit cap, so I'm not hit capped. So I'm going this way. Am I expertise capped or not? Well, I'm at 6.71%, so I'm over the expertise cap without gems, so I go this way. I'm expertise capped. Now I'm not crit capped. As you can see here, I am at 63.25%, and the crit soft cap is way over this, so I'm not crit capped. So we start putting 10 edge, 10 hit in. Okay, that is called glinting. So I'm starting to put the glinting in, starting off with the yellow sockets. No, not that one. Here. Sorry. And here. Now I'm starting to get a little bit closer to the hit cap, So we'll put just one more in this red. I'm out of yellow sockets, so I'm starting to put in red sockets. So putting a glinting one in here, and that brought me just over. So this last 10 edge 10 hit I put in is considered an edge gem. So I want to sim if this was worth it or not. But in order to know what gem I should put in its place, I got to continue along the flowchart and see where I land. Okay, so now I got hit capped I mean. So I got up here again. So I'm hit capped, I go this way. I know that I'm expertise capped already, so I go this way. Now, I got any yellow sockets left over. Well, I just put my last gem in a red socket because I ran out of yellows, so I have no empty yellow sockets left. We've already seen that I'm far away from the crit cap, so I will start putting 20 agility in the rest of my gear. Now, if I want to sim my stat weights that I want to do in order to know if this edge gem was worth it or not, I want to be as close, as finished as possible with the gemming. So I just fill out the rest of my gear here with 20 agility in order to be as close to my end product as I can. Okay, so that's all agility gems put in. Now I want to sim my stat weights here in order to know how much value this hit has compared to the crit. But before we do that, we got to think a little. Now, I'm just over the hit cap, so if I calculate my stat weights here, it will count my hit as 0 value, because all the hit I will get from this point on is worth 0, because I'm over the cap. So it won't make any sense filling in your stat weights here, so I got to change this to the gem that I'm considered putting in instead, which is this one. Now I'm just under the hit cap, so simming my caps here makes more sense because now hit will be worth something. So let's see what my calculated stat weights are. Okay, so now my stats are calculated, and as you can see, hit is now worth 2.28 and agility is worth 2.43. Now you can see here straight away that agility is more worth than hit, so I will just replace that last 10 edge 10 hit with 20 agility. Now these values is not 100% accurate. You can see here that they said that's a little variance here, so if you calculate this, you might get to the conclusion that hit is worth more than agility. Now in that case, you can't just say that hit is more worth than agility, so I'm keeping my 10 edge 10 hit gem, because not all of that hit is considered at its full value. So if I put 10 edge 10 hit in here, I will go over to 8.05%. Just do that. Continue. And if you do a little calculation, you'll see that only 8.33 of those hits is worth something. So you get to check 8.33 times this one must be greater than 10 times this one in order for you to have this gem as the ultimate gem. So I will just keep my delicate cardinal ruby in this case. Now, just for the sake of it, we can compare my gemming to what the sim suggests my gemming to be. So let's just do that. Okay, so this is the gems the sim want me to have. Now I have checked this, and they are putting in the exact same games as I do, except for this 20 hit gem here. So they replaced one 10 edge 10 hit with 20 hit. Now with my calculations, we come to the conclusion that that was not worth it, but they still went with it. Now I don't know how their algorithm looks, but hit must be worth a lot more than agility for it to be worth it in this edge case. But it's really just about a taste thing really, because this won't affect your raid performance at all. So if you want to be a little bit over the hit, that's fine. If you want to be a little bit under, it's fine. I just provided with two options, and both is considered optimal. And in my opinion, mine was a little bit more optimal, but that doesn't matter. Now, let's continue to the phase 3 best in slot setup and start gamming that setup. So, this is the Horde best in slot setup. Now, the first thing you want to do again before you start doing anything is to know your caps. Now, the hit, expertise, and armor pen caps are still the same, because this setup also uses Mjolnir Runestone, so nothing's changed there. This setup got both Idol of Mutilation and Death's Choice, and with both of those, my crit soft cap is considered 70.67 crit. So, with that in mind, we can start gamming the gear. So the first thing we want to do again is put the metal gem in. Then the Nightmare Tear, and I know beforehand again that the legs got the best socket bonus, so we're putting it there. Now, I want to get armor pen capped. And again, I'm a Ubercrafter, so I'll just start off with putting in the armor pen Ubercrafting gems and adjust later if we find out that was not optimal. So we're putting those 3 in here in red sockets. Now I'm still like 100 under the cap, so I will just continue putting fractured cardinal rubies in the rest of the red and blue sockets. Getting closer. Now I'm at 641 armor pen. That's 8 under, so I can creep a little closer than that by replacing one of these ones with another Ubercrafting gem. Now, which one of these you pick doesn't really matter in this stage, because we can do the fine adjustment later, but I just start off with putting the 34 agility in, since at the moment I'm under the crit cap. If I was over, I just put the bold one in and then change it later if that was not optimal, but we can just start off with the agility one and see what happens. Now the hit or expertise ones can also be considered if you're way under that cap and can't reach it otherwise, but I'm just starting here and we'll see what happens. Putting that one in then. Now it gives me room to put in 2 other fractured cardinal rubies in red sockets. So that brought me to 647. It's 2 under and I can't really creep any closer than that. So now my armor pen is done. So let's check this chart again. Started from the top, I put the metal gem in, the Nightmare Tear in, I'm armor pen soft cap, so now I gotta know if I'm hit capped or not. Well, my hit is almost perfect, so putting in just a little more hit will bring me over the cap, so that won't be worth it. So I will consider myself hit capped. So I go this way. Am I expertise capped or not? Well, I'm not. I'm like 1.5% under almost, so I will start putting in these 20 expertise ones in red sockets. I still got some red sockets left over, so like this one, so I can put it here. And this is also considered red, so putting it here. Now I'm at 208. So if I put first off, I'm 5 rating under. So if I put another 20 in, now 15 of those ratings would be wasted, so I don't even have to sim the edge gem here. I know that the edge gem, which is the next 20 expertise gem, won't be worth it. So I'm satisfied with an expertise here. Okay, so then I go this way. Do I got any yellow sockets left over? Well, I got plenty of yellow sockets left over. So I will start filling them out with 20 agi, 20 crit, and then see where we land. That's all the yellow gems filled in. Now, I'm at 72.12 crit now, which is over the cap, so the next step for me is to start replacing these 10 edge 10 crit with 10 strength 10 crit instead and see where I land. So, I will start replacing these gems then. Now I have replaced all the 10 agility 10 crit with 10 strength 10 crit in all of my gear, and I'm still a little bit over the cap. So I will start putting in 10 strength 10 haste instead of the 10 strength 10 crit until I'm under the cap. Okay, so let's start replacing a few of these ones then. The fierce one, And then another one, the fierce one. Now you can see I'm just 0.2 over the cap. That's still over the cap, so I will just put in another 20 strength, 20 haste, because if we would calculate those stat weights here, and we'll do that later, we will see that haste and crit is very, very, very close to each other. So having this crit just go over the cap by just a fraction, then haste will take the upper hand. So I will replace one more 10 strength 10 crit with 10 strength 10 haste. And now I'm under the crit cap. So now I consider this little part done. So now I got no empty yellow sockets left. So am I crit capped or not? Well, I do consider myself crit capped, so I will put in 20 strength in the rest of my gear. Now I only got one socket left here, so I will put a bold one in here. So now we reached the ultimate game setup. The only thing left to really consider is if this 34 agility was worth it or not. The thing I want to do here, because trading this one for a strength one, which is really my only option, and then maybe changing some 10 strength 10 haste back to 10 strength 10 crit, all I do is really trade around strength and agility for crit and haste. And as you can see here, if I do recalculate my stat weights, we'll see that these values are very close to each other, so it doesn't really matter. So let's calculate the stat weights again. So now the calculation is complete, and as we can see, the strength and agility is very close to each other with a little variance here as well. So if you calculate this again, agility might end up under strength. Same goes with the crit and haste. Now crit was a little bit over haste here, but if I do this again, haste might win out. So crit and haste and strength agility is considered really at the same value here. So what I want to do if I get here, because we are only really talking scenarios where we're close to the crit cap here, because as closer we get to the crit cap, the lower this value will be. So it's just when we're very close to the crit cap, we can consider crit and haste of the same value. If we are nowhere near the crit cap, then crit always wins out for haste. But that's not the case now. So the thing I want to do is I want to get as close to the crit cap as I can, but I don't want to go over it, even a little bit. So if you can see now, I'm at 70.47. If I were to change this one to a bold one, then that would give me a little more room for putting crit stuff in. So I can start replacing back this 10 strength 10 haste for 10 strength 10 crit. Inscribed there and here. Still a bit under. That's it, 70.64. So now I'm back at only having 10 strength 10 crit in all of the gear. Now that's only 0.03 under the crit cap, so I can't creep any closer than that. So I will now consider this being the optimal game setup. Now we can do a little comparison with what the sim would suggest our games to be, just for the fun of it. So let's do that. So this is the games they suggest us to use. Now I've checked this beforehand, and they still got some strength haste ones in, and they got an agility game there, and they went with 34 agility crafting game, and I've summarized this up, and they have essentially traded 54 strength and 40 crit from my setup for 54 agility and 40 haste in theirs. So the only thing they've done is traded strength for agility and crit for haste, and as I said earlier, these values are essentially the same, so it's a zero-sum game we're talking about here. So both of our setups are considered optimal when we are very close to the crit cap. So you can either choose either one you want. Now I like the one that's getting closer and closer to the crit cap. I don't know why, it's just the way I like it. So I just provided you guys with two different options of doing things. And I think my way wins out just for the sake of the understanding behind it. That's the game you choose to put in yourself and not games you were told to put in. And that's the big difference. If you want to get your hands on the flowchart I just followed to reach my conclusions, then just hit me up in the comments or PM me and I will give it to you. If there's anything else you'd like to ask, just write it in the comments. If there's anything I completely failed to explain to you, or if there's any other questions. Otherwise, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later.